Modern society is characterized by many things, but perhaps most notably by remarkable scientific and technological advancements, as well as capitalism, individualism, and hedonism. We are wealthier than our ancestors, we live in safer and more comfortable environments, and we have better access to food and other basic needs. So, why have we seen a massive spike in mental illness? The bulk of the evidence concludes that there was a significant rise in the incidence of mental illness in the 19th century, particularly in patients with what we now call schizophrenia. One of the most widely recognized features of modernity is the intense focus on the value and power of the individual self. Instead of seeking an objective external order, we turn inward and become aware of our own activity. This became a pervasive feature of human experience and self-knowledge in the 19th century. Western culture is dominated by individualism, subjectivism, and relativism, giving rise to a new character type dominating our age: the psychological man, intent on conquering his inner life. Mental illness must also be viewed in the context of modern social structures, including bureaucratization, technologization, secularization, and rationalization. Modern life's rational forms of social organization are more complex, conflicting, and require potentially disorienting cognitive adjustments. While there is an emphasis on individuality, individuals must also simultaneously adapt to society's evolving needs. Problems arise when these two aspects conflict, leading to a sense of inner division. In The Myth of Mental Illness, psychiatrist Thomas Szasz criticizes the psychiatric establishment for using mental illness as a metaphor to describe offending or disturbing behavior under the broad term schizophrenia, labeling it as an illness or disease. Szasz wrote, "If you talk to God, you are praying. If God talks to you, you have schizophrenia. If the dead talk to you, you are a spiritualist. If you talk to the dead, you are a schizophrenic." Many people behave and think in disturbing ways, but this does not necessarily mean they have a disease. Unlike physical illness, mental illness is judged against certain psychosocial, ethical, or legal norms. Transgressing these norms is not a consequence of illness, but rather an attempt to confront and tackle life's problems. Szasz does not suggest that mental illnesses do not exist. Instead, he claims that many such phenomena result from attempts to confront and deal with the problems of living, and that labeling them as diseases or illnesses hides the real problems people face. In the context of increasing self-awareness and freedom, modern individuals feel responsible for directing their own lives. As Jean-Paul Sartre asserted, we are condemned to be free, bearing the burden of our freedom and responsibility without the refuge of others. We must be responsible for ourselves, for we cannot have our existence depend on someone else. This contradicts the core of our being. While we can seek others' opinions, the ultimate choice lies within us. Many individuals struggle with this overwhelming freedom. Kierkegaard suggests that one can either get lost in the infinite, engaging in analysis paralysis, where one contemplates infinite possibilities but never acts, or get lost in the finite, becoming an imitation, a number, a cipher in the crowd. The latter leads to finitude's despair, or what we now call depressive psychosis. One cannot imagine alternative ways of life and remains bound by trivial obligations that provide no value. It's as if one has figuratively died to life but must continue to exist in this world, living dyingly. Eventually, one confronts the why of existence, as Albert Camus writes: rising streetcar, 4 hours in the office or factory, meal, streetcar, 4 hours of work, meal, sleep, and Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, following the same rhythm. This path is easily followed most of the time. But one day the why arises, and everything begins in that weariness tinged with amazement. Camus's absurd person is one who has recognized the absurdity of daily life's repetitive nature, conscious of the Sisyphean condemnation we all face as we push our own boulders and watch them roll back down. If our actions do not satisfy the why of existence, we must seek alternative paths or risk falling into an existential crisis, a nauseating sensation of trying to justify our existence, which can lead to suicide. One of Western civilization's most significant events is the Age of Enlightenment in the 18th century, which undermined the religious values upon which society had previously relied. This had profound cultural, sociological, and psychological repercussions, leaving many people facing a crisis of meaning or purpose in their existence, and struggling to deal with the problems that arise from this lack of direction. While we previously had ready answers to questions about how life should be lived and what its overall meaning and purpose were, thanks to faith in the existence of God, we are now slowly experiencing the consequences of what Nietzsche proclaimed as the death of God. This realization forces us to confront the terrifying question: does existence have any meaning at all? The modern age is characterized by a sense of disorientation, a feeling of not knowing what to do with one's life. Viktor Frankl, in response to this existential crisis and the psychological manifestations of meaninglessness, believes that we have been left in an existential vacuum, the unheard cry for meaning. According to him, much of modernity's increase in mental illness is a result of the struggle to confront this existential vacuum. He writes, "Such widespread phenomena as depression, aggression, and addiction are not understandable unless we recognize the existential vacuum underlying them." Frankl's therapeutic response to those experiencing such phenomena is to reorient the person toward the meaning or purpose of their existence, to confront the question of their life's meaning, to explore it, and ultimately, to provide a positive answer to it. Finding meaning in one's life is not an idle or academic curiosity that one engages in once more fundamental needs have been met. The pursuit of meaning or purpose in life is said to be the primary motivational force in humans. Without meaning, all of life's struggles, strivings, and projects become ultimately futile. Frankl believes that this sense of futility characterizes addiction, aggression, and depression. There is nothing in the world that would so effectively help one to survive even the worst conditions as the knowledge that there is a meaning in one's life. Frankl concludes, "In a word, each person is questioned by life, and they can only answer to life by answering for their own life. They can only respond to life by being responsible." Modern humans are in desperate need of the hero's journey. In Man and His Symbols, Jungian psychologist Joseph Henderson describes the importance of the hero myth as a universal pattern throughout the world. The hero descends into darkness to slay a dragon, rescue a damsel in distress, and gather treasure. The hero's early weaknesses are balanced by the appearance of strong guardians who enable them to perform tasks they couldn't accomplish alone. These guardians help develop the hero's strengths and weaknesses in a manner that equips them for life's challenges. This can be likened to the transition from dependence on one's parents to independence, where the individual has passed an initial test and can enter the mature phase of life. What actually takes place inside the mentally ill? In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Carl Jung's research led him to the burning question: what actually takes place inside the mentally ill? He writes, "To my mind, therapy only really begins after the investigation of that wholly personal story. It is the patient's secret, the rock against which they are shattered. If I know their secret story, I have a key to the treatment. In most cases, exploration of conscious material is insufficient. In therapy, the problem is always the whole person, never the symptom alone. We must ask questions that challenge the whole personality." Jung treated many schizophrenic patients, often considered hopeless cases. The paradox of schizophrenia lies in both the dissolution of the self in the world and the dissolution of the world in the self. It's a state of eternal punishment and divine omnipotence. Patients doubt that they are the ones thinking their thoughts, believing that reality could be a train of illusions created by evil scientists. It's the most profound form of self-contradiction, being both God and a worm. However, Jung discovered that many individuals diagnosed with schizophrenia actually suffered from ordinary depression due to traumas and difficult life experiences that had been repressed. He recounts the story of an 18-year-old girl who had been abused at the age of 15. She retreated into isolation and concealed herself from people. Taken to a mental hospital, she fell into a catatonic state. Over several weeks, Jung gradually persuaded her to speak. After overcoming numerous resistances, she revealed that she had been living on the moon. She disliked this world and found the moon beautiful, with a rich, meaningful life. She had been abused, leading to humiliation in the eyes of the world but elevation in her fantasies. This sense of complete alienation from the world plunged her into psychosis, and she became extra mundane, losing contact with humanity. By sharing her story with Jung, she in a sense betrayed the demon and attached herself to an earthly human being. Jung began to view the sufferings of the mentally ill differently, gaining insight into the richness and importance of their inner experiences. In the book Tribe, Sebastian Junger argues that throughout history, humans have had a strong instinct to belong to small groups or tribes that gave them purpose and an understanding of life. However, this tribal connection has been obliterated in modern society. During conflicts with Indian tribes, European settlers were sometimes taken as prisoners and held within these tribes. Strangely, after having the opportunity to escape and return to modern society, many refused, preferring the primitive society over the modern one. Conversely, not one tribesman wanted to flee to modern society. Humans have genetically evolved to live in interdependent groups to survive, creating equality as everyone plays a necessary role in the tribe. They work only 12 hours a week for survival, in contrast to the average 40-hour work week in many westernized societies. Tribes collaborate for survival, hunting and gathering together, and sharing their food in the evening. People often believe that modern life, with all its efficient technology, allows for more leisure time. However, the opposite is true. Modern life is characterized by a desperate cycle of work, financial obligations, and more work, sacrificing personal freedom. While one might argue that modernity has allowed for a sense of independence that primitive man could never have achieved, it can also lead to a feeling of alienation and depression. We have not yet genetically adapted to our environment. The enormous changes brought about by agriculture and the Industrial Revolution have barely begun to affect our gene pool. In other words, despite living in more complex societies, we are still hardwired to be hunter-gatherers. Today, we can be surrounded by a group of people and yet feel completely alone, a phenomenon relatively new to our species. We are wired to belong to a group where we feel valued for our contributions. Without this, many fall into a sense of meaninglessness. Sociologist Emil Durkheim first noticed the positive effects of war on mental health. Suicide rates, homicides, and admissions to psychiatric wards all decreased. Similarly, in natural disasters, people overwhelmingly devote their energy to the community rather than themselves. Adversity produces pro-social behaviors, in which individuals are likely to abandon their self-interest and sacrifice themselves for others, acting as a unified society, reverting to a more ancient way of life. Modernity has disrupted the social bonds that have always characterized the human experience. It fosters comfort, allowing people to act selfishly, resulting in an increase in mental illness due to a deep lack of community, which tribes historically provided. There is much we can learn from our ancestors in this regard. The world hangs on a thin thread, and that is the psyche of man. We are the great danger. How important it is to know something about it, but we know nothing about it. Jung warns us that we are pitifully unaware of our unconscious minds, having become overly rational and detached from our primitive instincts, leading to a dissociation in the psyche of modern civilization. He writes, "Things whose enormity nobody could have imagined in the idyllic harmlessness of the first decade of our country have happened and have turned our world upside down. Ever since, the world has remained in a state of schizophrenia. Modern man does not understand how much his rationalism, which has destroyed his capacity to respond to numinous symbols and ideas, has put him at the mercy of the psychic underworld. He has freed himself from superstition, or so he believes, but in the process he has lost his spiritual values to a positively dangerous degree. His moral and spiritual tradition has disintegrated, and he is now paying the price for this breakup in worldwide disorientation and dissociation." Despite the apparent eradication of superstitious and irrational elements from our world, a realistic view of the human mind reveals many primitive traits still playing their roles, as if nothing has changed over the centuries. Modern humans often feel isolated in the cosmos because they lack a deep connection with nature. When a primitive society's spiritual values are exposed to the impact of modern civilization, its people lose the meaning of their lives, their social organization disintegrates, and they morally decay. Unlike primitive man, modern man has lost contact with nature and the mystical participation in animals and trees. We may have advanced in the outer world, but our inner world remains delicate and fragmentary. A famous fictional example of modern dissociation is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. In the story, Jekyll's split takes the form of a physical change rather than an inner psychic state. Jung writes, "We can be possessed and altered by moods or become unreasonable and unable to recall important facts about ourselves or others. We talk about being able to control ourselves, but self-control is a rare and remarkable virtue. There is a world of difference between a conscious decision to split off and temporarily suppress a part of one's psyche, and a condition in which this happens spontaneously, without one's knowledge or consent, and even against one's intention. The former is a civilized achievement, the latter a primitive loss of a soul, or even a pathological cause of neurosis. To heal the split in the psyche, Jung advises exploring our unconscious through self-reflection and dream journaling. We must understand that there are aspects within us beyond our control, representing autonomous personalities. This is where we find vital insights for our lives and where the primitive aspects that form part of the original mind are preserved as archetypes. Despite our differences, we all share a collective unconscious that adapts itself to the unique individual experiences. We have been so busy with the question of what we think that we entirely forgot to ask what the unconscious psyche thinks about us.